Hello, folks. My name's Kathy Ace. I'm the author of the Kate Morgan Mysteries, the Wise Inquiries Agency Mysteries, and a dark psychological thriller called The Wrong Boy. That one's set in Wales, as are the Wise Inquiries Agency Mysteries, and that's where this accent's from as well, though now I'm a Canadian. Hey, I'm listening to the Dark and Stormy Book Club podcast. Are you? If not, you know what you should do? Listen. It's great. Enjoy!
Hello, and welcome to episode 175 of Dark and Stormy Book Club. We visit with the author, Mary Logue. Enjoy.
I'm Ann Dart.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
The Streel, published by University of Minnesota Press, is book number 1 in her Deadwood mystery series. When I was 15 and my brother Seamus was 16, we attended our own wake. Our family was in mourning, forced to send us off to America. The year is 1880, and of all the places Brigid Reardon and her brother might have dreamed of when escaping Ireland's potato famine by moving to America, Deadwood, South Dakota was not one of them. But Deadwood, in the grip of gold fever, is where Seamus lands and where Brigid joins him after eluding the unwanted attentions of the son of her rich employer in St. Paul, or so she hopes. But the morning after her arrival, a grisly tragedy occurs. Seamus, suspected of the crime, flees, and Brigid is left to clear his name and to manage his mining claim, which suddenly looks more valuable and complicated than he and his partners supposed. The Streel is the story of a young Irish woman turned reluctant sleuth as she tries to make her way in a strange and often dangerous new world. From the famine-stricken city of Galway to the bursting New York harbor, to the mansions of Summit Avenue in St. Paul, and finally to the raucous hustle of boomtown Deadwood, the Streel conjures the romance and the perils and the tricky everyday realities of a young immigrant surviving by her wits and grace in 19th century America. Mary Logue wrote her first mystery when she was in the 6th grade. It was about a mysterious trail around a pond. She continues to write about mysterious trails around Lake Pepin in her Claire Watkins mystery series. Some things never change. Mary is a poet, a rug hooker, and an author of children's literature. She writes the Claire Watkins series, the Brigid Reardon mystery series, as well as nonfiction books. For many years, she taught at the Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis, and currently she's on the faculty in the Low Residency Children's Literature MFA program at Hamline University in St. Paul. She is by Riverbank, living on both sides of the Mississippi with her husband, writer Pete Hopman, in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and the mother of Renee and Jacques, her toy poodles. We would like to welcome Mary Logue to the program. She is a mystery author who has several very strong women in her repertoire. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Lovely to be with two other strong women, I'm sure.
Speaking of strong women, you take strong women into different adventures. Where do you draw your characters from?
Well, again, I have to go way back and say I was raised by a mother who was raised by a mother who was raised by a mother who was very strong. And I've taken a lot of inspiration from them, both in what life dished out to them. My grandmother was pregnant with her 5th child when her husband was killed. It was the Depression. She lived in western Minnesota and became the postmistress of the small town and raised her 5 children on her own. And my mom was supposedly, I don't know how one checks these things, but supposedly the first person to go to college, I should say. So these were the women that I took my bearings from. And also, strong women often seem to get into more trouble than weak women, and trouble is always very interesting.
And they have more fun, too. I loved your character of Brigid. She was feisty, she was strong, but she still had a soft side. She had to be strong at an early age. She was about 15, left Ireland, had to sail across the ocean and deal with becoming a servant for part of the time, and then leaving all that when she was just really getting comfortable there, going out west. She had to help run a silver mine and take over when her brother had to leave town. She was quite the character.
Right.
Is she based on a real person?
You know, again, she's not, but I wrote a book about my grandmother, who I had just mentioned. In doing that research, I found my Irish ancestors and how they had come over. I did a lot of research into the famines. There was not just one, unfortunately, potato famine. There were more. And I was so fascinated by what it must have been like for them to leave this small country, probably never see their families again, knowing that. And I was trying to think, what would that have been like for us today? We're so connected around the world. Even with the pandemic, we can stay in touch. I thought about it as if we would go to Mars. I think that's about the closest we could come to how they must have felt when they did what they did. So you're right. She is a strong character and has to be. I mean, it's kind of thrown at her. And I also think that at that time, children became adults at a younger age than they do now. That often by 14, 15, 16, you were helping the family, you were married maybe. I think it's both what it would take to go on such an adventure and what it would draw out of you maybe.
Can you tell our listeners what a streel is?
Oh my, it is real. Streel, I don't know how to say it in Gaelic. In Gaelic, it's spelled Straoil. So I have to tell you the backstory. My mother, when my sisters and I were not looking our very best, maybe looking a little shoddy or kind of slutty, if you will, she would look at us and say, "Oh, you're not going out like that. You look like a streel." So when I was doing this research on my grandmother, I thought, I wonder what that means. And I looked it up in the Oxford English Dictionary and found out that, yes, it meant a slovenly woman, trollop, if you will.
Very interesting. You make me feel very lazy. You hook rugs, you write poetry, children's literature, nonfiction, and mysteries. When do you sleep, and which is your favorite pastime of all these?
I have a couple things going for me. One is I am married to another writer, Pete Hoffman, so he totally understands what I'm doing when I'm kind of wandering around aimlessly and knows not to disturb me. We give each other a lot of space. We both have our own rooms. I think it's very helpful to live with someone who really understands when I'm going down a deep hole. The other thing is we chose not to have children, and so that gives both of us a little more time. What I usually say is I usually write during the day and I hook at night.
Oh, you're a hooker.
And actually, I do a lot of handwork. I also knit and embroider a little bit. The handwork really is very soothing and a nice way to end the day. It kind of calms me down from the writing that I do sometimes. They actually go together quite well, and I can hook a rug and watch a TV show at the same time, so that's also very nice.
Well, I'm a knitter too. I know how soothing that can be, but I'm a winter knitter. I can't do it in the summertime.
Yeah.
Well, she also quilts. She does a lot too.
You also write the Karen Nash Librarian Sleuth books under a pseudonym. The story I read was her trip to England, and that was so much fun. Is that series going to continue?
Well, yes and no. There's one more book called Death Overdue. I have to tell you how this little series came about, if you will. I, for some reason, came up with the title, Killer Librarian, and I just thought it was such a fabulous title. Just such an odd juxtaposition of two words that I kept kind of brewing it. And then I got to a point when I was writing the Claire Watkins mystery series where I was kind of overwhelmed. That's a much more serious contemporary series. I felt like I personally needed some lightness in my life. So I came up with Killer Librarian and Karen Nash. It was just so much fun, and it felt like such an homage to all the books that I have read all my life long and how they have fed me and how wonderful librarians are. I have a dear, dear friend, Janet Nash, who lives in England, and so I had her go over all the British stuff, although I have visited England many times. Then I also had a good librarian friend go over all the librarian stuff, so I didn't goof up on any of that. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I just enjoyed writing it so much. It even made me laugh while I was writing it. And I wrote it under a different name because, again, it is such a different kind of book than the Claire Watkins. That's not unusual for us mystery writers to have more than one name. I could see maybe possibly writing a third, but at the moment I'm kind of deep into the Streel and the next book in that series. So we'll see what the future brings.
Well, I loved the end of that book with the solution to the ex-boyfriend. I thought that was the best. I can't imagine a book with a better ending.
You are so sweet. I need a tape of this so I can play it. When I figured that out, I was so thrilled. It's just, yeah, thank you.
I was listening to what you were saying about authors having different names. What is the motivation for that?
Mainly, I think, is to say to the readership, because it isn't a secret usually. It's to say to the reader, this is a different style. And I think that's such an interesting thing because if you write fiction, I don't know of anyone straight ahead novel fiction. I can't think offhand of someone who does that. But it's actually quite common in mystery writing. And again, I think that especially when you make such a different style. Killer Librarian is extremely different than my Claire Watkins. But in a way, the new series, the Streel, is more serious, kind of like the Claire Watkins series.
Speaking of Claire Watkins, we read The Bone Harvest and was very impressed how she was definitely taking charge of that case. Was the murder in the book based on an actual crime, or was it fiction all the way?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question because it is, again, somewhat a mix. I went to this small town in Minnesota to give a talk about the book of my grandmother again. And this woman came up to me afterwards and said, I just have to tell you about this farm family and what happened to them. She went into fairly great detail. I was quite fascinated. And then when I came back, I don't know if I was talking to somebody about that, but it turns out there was a farm family that also had a kind of a similar thing happen where the family was